The dust rose in golden clouds through the shafts of afternoon light. Every sweep of the broom sent decades of silence scattering across the worn floorboards of the cabin. Ethan Cole Harlow stood in the center of what had once been his grandfather's world, feeling like an intruder in a museum of abandonment. The place smelled of cedar and ghosts. Old pipe tobacco still clung to the walls even after 2 years of emptiness. A faded photograph hung crooked on the mantel. Garrison Harlow in uniform, young and certain eyes fixed on something beyond the camera's reach. A version of the man Ethan had never known. A stranger who happened to share his blood. Ranger lay near the door, amber eyes tracking every movement. The German shepherd's black and tan coat caught the dust-light particles swirling around him like snow that never fell. 7 years of training made him patient. 7 years of knowing when to watch and when to act. His ears swiveled toward sounds Ethan couldn't hear. The forest breathing, the cabin settling, the weight of time pressing down on old timber. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. 32 years old, and already his body carried the map of too many choices. The scar above his left eyebrow from shrapnel that came too close. The way his right knee locked up in cold weather, courtesy of a hard landing on uneven ground. The nightmares that came without warning, erupting like mortar fire in the quiet hours before dawn when the mind had no defenses left. He drove the broom harder across the floor. Physical work helped. Always had. When the thoughts got too loud, when the memories started their endless loop, he could swing a hammer or push a wrench, and the world would narrow down to something manageable. Something he could control. Wood and metal didn't talk back. Didn't judge. Didn't ask questions about the things you'd seen or done. Should have just sold it sight unseen, he muttered to the empty room. Taken whatever they offered and walked away. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. A single beat of acknowledgement. Ranger understood tone better than words. Understood that his human was talking to fill the silence, not because he expected answers. The shepherd had learned long ago that sometimes men just needed to hear their own voices to remember they were still real. 3 weeks ago, Ethan had sat in a lawyer's office in town. The building had smelled of paper and furniture polish, and the particular staleness that came from air conditioning that ran year-round. Sarah Mitchell's face had been professionally sympathetic as she slid the folder across the mahogany desk. Last will and testament of Garrison Harlow. The words had blurred together until she reached the distribution of assets. To his nephew Charles, the eastern pasture and farming equipment, 40 acres of prime grazing land and machinery that still worked. To his granddaughter-in-law Margaret, the savings account and the pickup truck, $18,000 in a vehicle with less than 60,000 miles. Good value, practical gifts for practical people. And to his grandson Ethan Cole Harlow, the cabin at Pine Ridge. That was it. Just the cabin. 4 walls and a roof that probably leaked. No land around it worth mentioning. No explanation. No personal note tucked inside expressing love or regret or anything resembling human emotion. Just a structure made of wood and nails and 70 years of silence. The lawyer had cleared her throat. Sometimes inheritance isn't measured in money, Mr. Harlow. Ethan had wanted to tell her that platitudes didn't pay the rent on his trailer. That wisdom and memories couldn't fix the transmission on his dying Chevy that ground gears every time he shifted into third. That all the metaphorical value in the world wouldn't cover the debt from Morrison's garage, where he worked part-time fixing other people's problems, while his own piled up like unpaid invoices stacked on a desk nobody looked at. Instead, he'd signed the paperwork and left. Drove back to his trailer and stared at the ceiling for 3 hours trying to decide if it was worth the gas money to even come look at the place. Now here he stood inheriting dust and disappointment. The floorboard creaked beneath his boot. He shifted his weight and heard it again. A loose board near the far corner where the shadows gathered thickest. Probably rotted through. Probably another $100 he didn't have to spend on repairs before he could unload this place on some city person looking for a romantic notion of country living. Ranger's head came up sharp. The dog rose to his feet in one fluid motion, muscles coiling beneath his coat like springs being compressed. His ears were forward locked on that corner, like a radar dish that had just picked up an incoming signal. The shepherd's entire body went still, except for his nostrils flaring wide as he read stories written in scent and time. "What is it, boy?" The question was automatic, unnecessary. Ethan had learned years ago to trust the dog's alerts without questioning them. Ranger didn't false alarm, didn't get excited over squirrels or passing cars or the 100 meaningless stimuli that made other dogs bark. Every signal was deliberate, professional. The legacy of training that had saved Ethan's life more times than he cared to count. The shepherd moved across the room, nose low to the ground, each step placed with precision. When he reached the corner, he stopped, pawed at the floorboard once, twice, then looked back at Ethan with those intelligent eyes that had seen things most dogs never would. Combat zones, blast sites, the places where men broke and needed someone to pull them back from the edge. Ethan set down the broom and crossed to where Ranger stood. The dog stepped aside, making room but keeping watch. That was the thing about Ranger. He never panicked, never made noise without reason. Every alert was a conversation, a message delivered without words. Ethan knelt and pressed his hand against the board. It shifted under the pressure. Not rotten, loose. The nails had been pulled and replaced, the work done carefully but not perfectly. Someone had opened this board before. Someone had wanted to hide something underneath. Someone had secrets they'd buried in the dark spaces between floor and foundation. His pulse kicked up a notch, the familiar sensation of adrenaline starting to flow. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. The feeling he used to get approaching a suspicious package. The awareness that the next few moments could change everything. He fetched the crowbar from his duffel bag near the door. Military habits died hard. Always carry tools. Always be ready. Never assume the world would provide what you needed when you needed it. The iron felt good in his hands, solid and certain. Weight and leverage translated into power and control. The board came up with a reluctant groan, wood against wood, nails releasing their grip on timber they'd held for decades. Beneath the space between the floor joists yawned dark. The smell that rose was earth and rust and something else. Something metallic and old, the scent of things kept secret. Ranger pressed close, peering into the gap. The dog's breathing changed slightly. Faster, more focused. He was tracking something now, following a scent trail that led backward through time. Ethan pulled out his phone, thumbed on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and caught the glint of metal. A box. Small, maybe the size of a toolbox, wrapped in layers of cloth, gone brittle with age. The fabric crumbled at his touch as he lifted it out. Heavier than it looked. Dense. The weight of secrets made physical. He sat back on his heels. Ranger settled beside him, the dog's warmth pressing against his leg. Grounding him, reminding him he wasn't alone in this moment, whatever this was. The latch gave with a click that sounded too loud in the empty cabin. Inside, nestled in the remains of oiled cloth, lay two things. A brass key worn smooth by handling with numbers etched into its surface. 2, 4, 7. The engravings were deep cut by hand, not stamped by machine. Someone had wanted these numbers to last. And beneath the key, a letter. The paper was yellowed at the edges, folded with military precision, creases sharp enough to cut. The handwriting on the outside was familiar, even after all these years. Ethan, his grandfather's hand, the same looping script that had signed birthday cards when Ethan was young. Before the silence. Before Garrison had stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped being anything more than a name on a fading photograph, and a signature on a check that arrived every Christmas with mechanical regularity. Ethan's throat tightened. He set the key aside and unfolded the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. The paper felt fragile, too thin, like it might disintegrate if he breathed on it wrong. The words swam for a moment before coming into focus. Ethan, if you're reading this, you've found the key, and maybe it means you're ready. There are things I couldn't put in words when I was alive, secrets that weighed more than I could carry alone. The key will take you where I could never go again. Trust your instincts. Don't go alone. You were always the only one who understood how to listen. To machines, to people, to the land itself. Now listen again. The truth isn't buried as deep as you think. Grandpa Garrison. Ethan read it twice. Then a third time. The words pressed deeper with each pass, raising more questions than they answered. Secrets. Truth. Things buried but not deep. What the hell did that mean? He looked at the key again, turning it in the light. The brass caught the sun and threw small reflections across the cabin wall. 247. Not a house key. The shape was wrong. Older. Industrial maybe. The kind of key that opened locks, built to last. Built to protect something worth protecting. The photograph tucked in the bottom of the box gave him part of the answer. Black and white, the edges soft with age. 5 men standing in front of a building with corrugated metal walls. They wore work clothes and hard hats. Behind them, barely visible in the background, a sign. The letters were faded but legible. Fort Shadow, Project Silence, 1947. Ethan's breath caught. He knew that name. Not from family stories. from the scattered rumors that floated through veteran circles. The kind of stories old-timers told late at night when the whiskey loosened, tongues, and discretion didn't matter anymore. Fort Shadow had been a military research facility. Cold War era. Black budget projects that officially never existed. Acoustic weapons. Sound that could kill. Technology that the government had supposedly buried when the tests went wrong. Supposedly. Ethan pulled out his phone again and typed the words into the search bar. The results loaded slowly on the cabin's weak signal. Fort Shadow. Conspiracy theories. Declassified documents with half the text redacted. Forum posts from people who claimed their uncles or fathers had worked there. All of it unverified. All of it wrapped in the bong of plausible deniability that governments excelled at creating. But there in the third result down was a scanned newspaper article from 1952. The headline read, "Military Facility Closure Leaves Questions Unanswered." The article was brief, professional, the kind of journalism that reported facts without asking uncomfortable questions. Fort Shadow in Montana had ceased operations. No official reason given. Local workers dismissed with severance packages and non-disclosure agreements. The land had been returned to federal management. Nothing to see here. Move along. Ethan zoomed in on the photograph accompanying the article. The same building, the same metal walls. And there, third from the left, in a group of workers being interviewed, was a face he recognized. Young, maybe 21 years old, but unmistakable. Garrison Harlow. His grandfather had been there, had worked on Project Silence, had been part of whatever happened that made the government shut the whole thing down and bury the records. And now, 74 years later, he'd left Ethan a key and a letter that said the truth wasn't buried as deep as anyone thought. Ranger stood suddenly, ears swiveling toward the cabin door. A moment later, Ethan heard it too. The crunch of tires on gravel. The sound of an engine cutting off. A car door closing with the solid thunk of American steel. Ethan rose, slipping the key into his pocket. The letter he folded and tucked into his jacket. The photograph went back in the box, which he pushed under the loose floorboard. Instinct more than thought. Keep the secret secret until you know who's asking. Through the window he saw an old pickup truck. Faded blue paint. Montana plates. A man climbed out, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints had logged too many hard miles. White hair under a worn baseball cap. Flannel shirt tucked into jeans. Boots that had been resoled more than once. The man paused when he saw Ethan's truck parked outside, then continued toward the cabin door carrying a small bundle wrapped in newspaper. Flowers. Wildflowers from the look of them, picked fresh that morning. Ethan opened the door before the knock came. The old man stopped on the porch, eyes going wide for just a second. Then something softened in his weathered face. Recognition, memory, maybe grief. "Lord above," the man said, his voice rough as river stones. "You look just like him." "Like who?" "Garrison, your grandfather." The old man shifted the flowers in his hands. "I'm Augustus Brennan. Most folks call me Gus. I was your grandfather's friend." Ethan studied him. 97 years old if the math worked out right, but standing straight, eyes clear. The kind of man who'd worked with his hands his whole life and didn't know how to stop. "Friend," Ethan repeated. The word felt strange, foreign. "Funny, I don't remember him mentioning you." Gus's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile. Garrison didn't mention a lot of things. It was his nature, or maybe his training. He glanced past Ethan into the cabin. "Mind if I come in? Got some things I probably should have said at the funeral but couldn't. Too many ears." Ranger stepped up beside Ethan, not aggressive but present, watching, assessing. "Easy boy," Ethan said quietly. To Gus he added, "What kind of things?" "The kind that might explain why he left you this place instead of something more practical. The kind that might make sense of that key you're carrying in your right pocket." Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his jacket. The outline of the key was visible if you knew what to look for. Gus knew. "You were there," Ethan said, not a question. "Fort Shadow, 1947. We were both 21 years old and thought we were going to change the world." Gus set the flowers on the porch railing. "May I?" Ethan stepped aside. Gus walked into the cabin like a man entering a church, slow, reverent. His eyes took in the space with the familiarity of someone who'd spent time here. Who knew which boards creaked and where the light fell best in the afternoon? He moved to the mantel and looked at the photograph there. Young Garrison in his uniform. Gus reached up and straightened the frame just a little. A gesture so automatic it had to be habit. "He kept this place exactly the same," Gus said, "for 50 years, like he was waiting for something. Or someone." He barely spoke to me after I turned 12. Ethan said the words coming out harder than he intended. Didn't come to my graduation. Didn't come when I deployed. Sent a card at Christmas with 50 bucks inside and his signature. That was it. Gus nodded slowly. He had his reasons? Yeah, what reasons justify cutting off your own family? The kind that keep them alive. The words hung in the air between them. Heavy, loaded with implications Ethan wasn't sure he wanted to understand. Ranger moved to Gus and sniffed his hand. The old man led him standing still, while the dog completed his assessment. After a moment, the dog's tail gave a single sweep across the ground. Approval. Smart dog, Gus said. Garrison had one like him. Called him Scout. That was back before the war, before everything got complicated. He looked at Ethan. You found more than just the key, didn't you? Found the letter, maybe a photograph. How did you? Because I helped him put it there. Gus lowered himself into the old chair by the window, the one with the cushion worn to the shape of Garrison's body. 30 years ago, when his health started failing the first time, he said if he didn't make it, someone had to know. Someone had to decide what to do with what we buried. Ethan pulled the photograph from the box and held it up. Fort Shadow, Project Silence, 1947. Gus's eyes went distant. We were so young, thought we were building the future. Defense technology that would keep America safe, keep another war from happening. He shook his head. We were building a nightmare. The internet says it was an acoustic weapon. The internet doesn't know the half of it. Gus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Project Silence was supposed to be non-lethal, sound waves at specific frequencies, enough to disorient an enemy, enough to break up formations without bloodshed. The theory was beautiful, clean, scientific. What happened? We built it, we tested it. Gus's voice went flat. 3 men died instantly, another went deaf and never spoke again. The frequency we achieved, it didn't just disorient, it liquefied tissue. It turned human beings into, he stopped, swallowed hard. They made us sign papers, made us swear we'd never speak of it. Then they shut the whole facility down and buried the records. Ethan felt the key in his pocket like a burning coal. But they didn't bury the machine. No, they wanted to. Garrison and I were ordered to dismantle it, destroy the components, scatter the pieces so it could never be rebuilt. Gus met his eyes. We dismantled it, but we didn't destroy it. Why not? Because men were dying to cover up what we'd built. The scientists who protested, the officers who questioned orders. Accidents started happening. Car crashes, heart attacks. People who knew too much suddenly didn't know anything anymore. Gus's hands clenched into fists on his knees. Garrison said the only way to stay safe was to make it clear we had leverage. We had the machine, we had the proof, and if anything happened to us, that proof would come to light. Where did you hide it? Whispering Lake, about 10 miles north of here. There's a natural cave system beneath the lake bed. We sealed the machine in a chamber and buried the entrance. Made it look like a collapsed mine shaft. Then we walked away and never spoke of it again. Ethan pulled out the key. And this, Gus's eyes fixed on the brass, that's the key to a safety deposit box at Pine Ridge Savings and Loan. Box 247. Inside, you'll find the rest of the documents. The ones Garrison kept as insurance, technical specifications, testimony from the families of the men who died. Everything the government wanted destroyed. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Ethan walked to the window and looked out at the forest. The afternoon sun was slanting through the pines, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. Why now, he asked. Why leave this to me? Because Garrison kept track of you. Even when he couldn't be part of your life, he watched. He knew you enlisted, knew you became EOD, knew you learned how to handle things that could explode if touched wrong. Gus stood, joints creaking. He said you were the only one with the training and the spine to finish what we started. Finish it how? That's your choice to make. You could destroy it for real this time. Make sure it never falls into the wrong hands. Or you could expose it. Bring the truth into the light and let the world decide what to do with it. Ethan turned from the window. What would he have wanted? He wanted you to choose for yourself. He wanted you to understand why he did what he did, why he stayed away. It wasn't because he didn't love you. Gus's voice cracked just slightly. It was because he did. Ranger pressed against Ethan's leg, the solid warmth, the reminder that whatever choice came next, he wouldn't face it alone. Ethan pulled the letter from his pocket and read the last line again. The truth isn't buried as deep as you think. No, Gus agreed, it's not. And there are men who've been looking for it, Men who want what Garrison hid, who think they can use it, control it, finish what Project Silence started. He walked to the door and paused. Be careful, son. Your grandfather spent 70 years protecting that secret. It cost him everything. His marriage, his family, his peace. Who's looking for it? Gus's face darkened. Vaughn Sterling, he runs a development company now, but back in the 80s, he was Garrison's assistant. Apprentice. Your grandfather taught him engineering, trusted him, until he realized Vaughn didn't just want to learn, he wanted to inherit. Inherit what? The machine, the knowledge, the power. Gus opened the door. Vaughn thinks he can control what we built, thinks he can make it work the way it was supposed to. He doesn't understand that some things aren't meant to exist. The old man stepped onto the porch and picked up his flowers. I'll leave these here, for Garrison. He loved this place, loved the quiet. He looked back at Ethan one more time. Whatever you decide, make it count. Make it worth what he sacrificed. Then he was walking back to his truck, moving like a man who'd said everything that mattered and had nothing left to carry except memories. Ethan stood in the doorway watching the blue pickup disappear down the dirt road. The dust settled slowly. The forest returned to its rhythm of wind and birdsong. Ranger sat beside him, patient and watchful. The key felt heavy in Ethan's hand. 247, a number that led to documents, to proof, to a choice he wasn't sure he was ready to make. He looked down at his dog. What do you think, buddy? Should we let sleeping nightmares lie? Or should we dig them up and see what crawls out? Ranger responded with a brief wag, acknowledging the words. Then the shepherd walked back into the cabin and sat down near the loose floorboard. Waiting, ready, the way he always was when there was work to be done. Ethan smiled despite everything. Yeah, that's what I thought. He pulled out his phone and searched for Pine Ridge Savings and Loan. The bank was open until 5. He had 2 hours to get there. 2 hours to decide if he was really going to walk through that door and unlock whatever Garrison had kept hidden for 3/4 of a century. The photograph on the mantel caught his eye again. Young Garrison, eyes fixed on something beyond the frame. Ethan understood that look now. It was the look of a man who'd seen too much, known too much, carried too much. It was the look Ethan saw in his own mirror some mornings. He tucked the key back into his pocket, folded the letter and placed it carefully in his jacket. Then he knelt and slid the box back under the floorboard, replacing the plank exactly as it had been. Come on, Ranger. We've got a bank to visit. The dog rose smoothly and followed him out to the truck. The afternoon was fading into early evening, the light going soft and golden, the kind of light that made promises it couldn't keep, that made the world look gentle when it was anything but. Ethan climbed behind the wheel. His Chevy rumbled to life, the transmission grinding just a little in second gear. Another repair he couldn't afford, another problem for another day. Today he had a different kind of problem, the kind that came with brass keys and buried secrets and old men who'd spent their whole lives carrying weight they couldn't put down. He pulled onto the dirt road heading toward town. Ranger sat in the passenger seat watching the trees roll past, alert but calm, ready for whatever came next. The way he always was, the way Ethan needed to be. Because somewhere out there a man named Vaughn Sterling was looking for what Garrison had hidden. And men who wanted power badly enough didn't stop looking just because time passed. They didn't stop because it was dangerous. They didn't stop because people had died. They stopped when someone made them stop. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, the key in his pocket pressed against his ribs. A small piece of metal that weighed more than it should, that promised answers and threatened questions he wasn't sure he wanted to ask. But he was going to ask them anyway, because Garrison had chosen him for a reason, had left him this burden for a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, understanding that purpose would help Ethan understand the man who'd vanished from his life all those years ago. The man who'd loved him enough to stay away. The man who'd trusted him enough to leave him the truth. The trees thinned as they approached the edge of Pine Ridge. The town appeared through the windshield, small and tired, and exactly the same as it had been 20 years ago. Nothing changed here. Nothing except the people who left and the secrets they left behind. Ethan checked the time. 4:15. He had 45 minutes before the bank closed. 45 minutes to decide if he was ready to open Pandora's box. Ranger looked at him. Those amber eyes that had seen him through the worst moments of his life, that had pulled him back from edges he'd been too close to falling over, that trusted him completely, without question, without doubt. Here we go, Ethan said quietly. The shepherd's tail brushed the seat in a short, deliberate arc, and together they drove into town. Pine Ridge Savings and Loan occupied a brick building on Main Street that had stood since 1923. The kind of place where 3 generations of the same family had kept their money and their secrets. Where handshakes still mattered more than contracts. Where the woman behind the counter knew your name before you said it. Ethan pushed through the heavy glass door at 423. Ranger walked beside him, service dog vest, visible, trained to ignore the curious glances from the 2 other customers in the lobby, an elderly woman making a deposit, a young man in coveralls cashing a paycheck. Both looked at the shepherd, then away. That was the thing about service dogs. People knew not to stare. The teller was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a nameplate that read Dorothy. She looked up from her computer screen and smiled the professional smile that said she'd done this 10,000 times before. Help you. Ethan approached the counter. I need to access a safety deposit box. Number 247. Dorothy's fingers moved across the keyboard. Name, Ethan Cole Harlow. The typing stopped. Dorothy looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. Not suspicion, recognition. Garrison's grandson. Yes, ma'am. Her expression softened. I was sorry to hear about his passing. He was a good man. Quiet, but good. She typed again, slower this time. The box is registered under his name with a provision for transfer to you upon his death. Do you have identification in the key? Ethan produced his driver's license and the brass key. Dorothy examined both, then nodded. Follow me, please. She led him through a door behind the counter down a short hallway that smelled of old paper and floor wax. The vault door stood open, massive and circular, the kind of engineering that belonged to an era when banks built fortresses instead of branches. Inside, the walls were lined with small metal doors, each with its own number and lock. Dorothy pulled a master key from her pocket and inserted it into the top lock of box 247. Your key goes in the bottom. Ethan slid the brass key home. Both turned together with a click that sounded too loud in the confined space. Dorothy pulled the long metal box from its slot and carried it to a small private room barely bigger than a closet. A table, a chair, a single overhead light. Take your time, she said and closed the door behind her. Ethan stood for a moment staring at the box. Plain steel, maybe 2 feet long, 6 inches deep. The kind of container that could hold a lot of paper. A lot of truth, a lot of reasons why a man might cut himself off from everyone he loved. Ranger sat beside the chair watching. Patient, present. Ethan lifted the lid. The box was full. Documents organized in folders, each labeled in Garrison's careful handwriting. Technical specifications, witness statements, personnel records, incident reports. And beneath everything, a manila envelope marked with a single word in red ink. Insurance. Ethan pulled out the technical folder first. Inside were blueprints, schematics, pages of equations and frequency calculations that made his head hurt just looking at them. The header on each page read Fort Shadow Research Facility. Project Silence. Classified, stamped across every document in faded red ink, destroy after review. Someone had ignored that order. The machine itself was elegant in its design. A series of resonance chambers connected to amplifiers. Parabolic reflectors to focus the sound. Frequency modulators calibrated to specific wavelengths. The theory was sound, literally. Use acoustic waves to create pressure differentials. Target the fluid in human tissue. Incapacitate without permanent harm. The theory was beautiful. The practice was murder. Ethan opened the incident reports folder. His hands weren't quite steady. The first page was typed on an old manual typewriter, the letters slightly uneven. Date November 3, 1947. Subject field test Alpha 7. The report was clinical. Dry. 3 test subjects exposed to acoustic pulse at 147 decibels, frequency modulated between 18 and 24 hertz. Duration 4.3 seconds. Results immediate incapacitation. Medical examination revealed Ethan stopped reading, looked away, took a breath that felt like broken glass going down. Ranger's head pressed against his knee, warm, solid, real. The dog sensed the shift in his human state, responding the way he'd been trained, grounding without words. Ethan forced himself to continue. The medical details were worse than he'd imagined. Internal hemorrhaging, organ rupture, death within minutes for 2 subjects. The third lingered for 6 hours before his heart finally stopped. The doctors had tried everything. There was nothing to try. The damage was too complete, too thorough, too fundamental. The next report was dated 3 days later, an investigation into the incident. Recommendations for frequency adjustments, suggestions for reduced power output, as if the problem was calibration instead of concept, as if you could tune a weapon of that nature to be gentle. The test continued for another 2 weeks. Different subjects, different frequencies, same results. Then the report stopped abruptly. No explanation, no conclusion, just silence. The kind of silence that came when someone decided the truth was too dangerous to write down. Ethan pulled out the personnel records, a list of names, scientists, engineers, military observers, and next to some names, handwritten dates. Charles Brennan, deceased December 1947. Richard Foster, deceased January 1948. Margaret Chen, deceased March 1948. Not retired, not transferred. Deceased. Garrison had underlined 3 names in red ink. Drawn arrows, written notes in the margin. Car accident, no witnesses. Heart attack, age 34. Suicide, note suspicious. People who knew too much. People who asked questions. People who threatened to talk. The witness statements folder was thinner. Only 4 documents. Testimony from the families of the men who died in the tests. Typed statements that had never been submitted to any official investigation. Letters pleading for answers, for accountability. For someone to acknowledge that their husbands and sons hadn't just died. They'd been killed. All 4 letters were stamped with the same response. Unable to comment on classified operations. No further action warranted. The last folder was the one that made Ethan's stomach turn. Personnel file for project director. The name at the top of the page was one he recognized. Marcus Sterling, chief engineer, date of birth 1899. Date of termination December 1947, reason project cancellation. Von Sterling's grandfather. Or great-grandfather, given the dates. The family connection ran deeper than Gus had said. Ethan set down the folder and picked up the manila envelope marked insurance. Inside was a single letter handwritten addressed to him. Ethan, if you've made it this far, you understand now why I couldn't be part of your life. Why I had to stay away. Not because I didn't care, but because caring made you a target. The men who built Project Silence didn't all walk away. Some of them still believe in what we tried to create. Still think the machine can work if only they find the right frequency, the right power, the right conditions. They've been looking for it for 70 years, looking for me, for Gus, for anyone who knows where we buried it. I stayed away from you so they wouldn't look at you, so you could have a life free from this weight. But now I'm gone, and the secret can't stay buried forever. Someone needs to decide what happens next. I chose you because you understand explosives. You know what happens when volatile things are handled wrong. The machine is volatile. The knowledge is volatile. What you do with both is your choice. But know this, Von Sterling has been asking questions, making offers, trying to buy the land. He thinks like his grandfather thought, believes in power through force, through control. He'll come for what's hidden. The only question is whether you'll let him find it or whether you'll destroy it first. Either way, be careful. Trust your instincts, and don't go alone. You have good friends. To them, love always, even from a distance. Garrison. Ethan folded the letter with hands that shook slightly. The weight of it, the years of isolation, the sacrifice of every relationship to keep a secret that men had killed to protect and killed to find. He gathered the documents, placed them carefully in his backpack. Every folder, every page, evidence of a crime that had never been prosecuted, a weapon that had never been destroyed, a conspiracy that had lasted 3/4 of a century. Dorothy knocked softly on the door. "Everything all right in there?" "Fine," Ethan called back. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "Just finishing up." He locked the empty box and carried it back to the vault. Dorothy replaced it in its slot, turned both keys, and locked it again. The ritual complete. "Find what you needed," she asked. "More than I wanted." She nodded as if she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe in a town this small, everyone knew that some boxes held more than valuables. Some held the reasons people stayed away, the reasons they came back. The sun was lower when they emerged from the bank, the shadows longer, the air cooling as evening approached. Ranger led the way to the truck, moving with the focused purpose that meant he'd picked up on Ethan's tension. Dogs knew. They always knew. Ethan drove to the library without consciously deciding to. His hands made the turns while his mind processed what he'd read. The deaths, the cover-up, the families who'd never gotten answers, the machine still waiting in the dark beneath Whispering Lake. Pine Ridge Public Library was a small building that shared space with the community center. Books on one side, meeting rooms on the other. A parking lot with 6 spaces, 3 of them occupied. Ethan pulled in and killed the engine. Wait here, buddy. Ranger's ears went back slightly. He didn't like being left behind. But the library had rules about animals and service dog or not. Ethan didn't want to draw more attention than necessary. Inside the library smelled like books and coffee and the particular silence that came from people reading alone together. A teenager hunched over a laptop, an older man browsing the mystery section, and behind the main desk a woman with blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, glasses perched on her nose, typing on a computer that had been outdated 5 years ago. She looked up as Ethan approached, smiled, the kind of smile that came naturally to people who spent their days helping others find things. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for local history, specifically anything about Fort Shadow." The smile faltered just a fraction. Interest replaced it, sharpened by curiosity. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while. Let me guess. You're Ethan Harlow." He stopped. "How did you— Small town. Word travels. Garrison's grandson back to settle the estate." She stood and extended her hand. "Meredith Whitmore. I've been the librarian here for 15 years, which means I've heard most of the old stories at least once." Her handshake was firm, no nonsense. The grip of someone who moved a lot of heavy books and didn't need help doing it. "What kind of stories?" Ethan asked. "The kind people tell when they think no one's listening." "Coffee." She poured 2 cups from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint. Ethan took a sip and felt his synapses fire in protest. Meredith led him to a back room marked Local History and Archives. The shelves were packed with boxes, binders, and file folders organized by decade. She pulled down a box labeled 1940s, military, and set it on a reading table. "Fort Shadow," she said, opening the box and rifling through folders. Officially, it was a communications research facility. Unofficially, it was whatever the government needed it to be and didn't want anyone asking about. She pulled out a file folder. "I've been collecting what I can find, news clippings, interviews with former workers. Most of them are dead now, but some of their families still live around here." The folder contained photocopies of newspaper articles, handwritten notes, and a few grainy photographs. Ethan recognized some of the images from the documents in the safety deposit box. The same building, the same men. But here there was context, names, dates, stories. "What happened there?" Meredith asked quietly. "The official story is they were working on radio technology. But people don't ship down radio projects overnight and make everyone sign non-disclosure agreements." Ethan considered how much to say. "Trust your instincts," Garrison had written. "Don't go alone to my men." "They were building a weapon," he said finally. "Acoustic, sound-based. It was supposed to be non-lethal." "But it wasn't." "No." And Meredith pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "People died during the tests. That's what the old-timers used to say. Workers who asked too many questions ended up in accidents. Families got paid off to stay quiet." She tapped one of the photographs. "This man here, James Whitmore, my grandfather. He worked at Fort Shadow for 6 months before he quit. Said he couldn't stomach what they were doing. Came home one day, packed up the family, and moved to Seattle. Never spoke about it again. Smart man. Scared man, but maybe that's the same thing." She looked at Ethan directly. Green eyes that had read enough books to recognize the shape of a story when she saw one. "You're not just researching family history, are you? You're trying to figure out what to do about something." Outside, Ranger's bark cut through the quiet, sharp, urgent, the kind of alert that meant something was wrong. Ethan was moving before thought caught up. Through the library, out the front door, into the parking lot where his truck sat, and a black Mercedes sedan had pulled in beside it. Sleek, expensive, the kind of car that cost more than Ethan made in 2 years. The windows were tinted, but he could see a figure in the driver's seat. Watching. Ranger stood at the truck's bumper, hackles, raised teeth showing in a warning that was perfectly clear even without sound. The Mercedes door opened. A man stepped out. 65, maybe. Silver hair combed back from a tanned face. Expensive suit that fit like it had been tailored specifically for his frame. Leather shoes polished to a mirror shine. He moved with the confidence of someone used to being the most powerful person in any room. He looked at Ranger, then at Ethan, and smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Ethan Cole Harlow, Marine EOD Specialist, Bronze Star for Actions in Helmand Province. Honorable discharge. Currently employed part-time at Morrison's Auto Repair." The man's voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of someone who'd given a lot of speeches and won a lot of arguments. Impressive record. Ethan's spine went rigid, every instinct screaming danger. "Who the hell are you?" Vaughn Sterling. I run Sterling Development Group. Perhaps you've heard of us. We're one of the largest land acquisition firms in Montana. He gestured to the library behind Ethan. Researching your family history, I see. Admirable. Garrison was a remarkable man. I learned a great deal from him. You knew my grandfather. I was his apprentice for 5 years, from 1985 to 1990. He taught me engineering, precision, the value of patience. Vaughn's smile widened slightly, and the importance of knowing when to let go of the past. Meredith had followed Ethan out. She stood on the library steps, arms crossed, watching the exchange with the careful attention of someone who documented everything. Vaughn noticed her and nodded politely. Miss Whitmore, your family has deep roots in this community. I hope they're well. She didn't respond, didn't move, just watched. Vaughn turned his attention back to Ethan. I'll be direct. I understand you've inherited Garrison's property, the cabin and surrounding land. I'd like to make you an offer, a generous one, well above market value. Not interested. You haven't heard the number. Don't need to. $400,000 for a cabin that's falling apart and 40 acres of forest that you can't develop without extensive permits. That's more than fair. The answer's still no. Vaughn tilted his head slightly. May I ask why you're living in a trailer, working part-time? That kind of money could change your life, set you up, give you options. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. The property's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Mr. Harlow. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Vaughn stepped closer, not threatening, just closing distance. Or perhaps it's not about money. Perhaps you found something that makes you curious. Documents, keys, letters from a man who spent his life carrying secrets. The way he said it, the specific words, he knew. Not everything, but enough. Ranger growled low, a sound that vibrated through his chest like distant thunder. Vaughn stopped, looked down at the dog. Beautiful animal, German Shepherd, service dog, I see. They're remarkable companions. Loyal, protective. His eyes came back to Ethan. I hope you take good care of him. Accidents happen, especially in rural areas. Predators, hunters who mistake a dog for wildlife. Tragic but not uncommon. The threat was clear, wrapped in polite language, but clear. Ethan took a step forward. If anything happens to my dog, I'm simply observing the dangers of country living, no need for hostility. Vaughn reached into his jacket. Ethan's hand moved instinctively toward his hip muscle memory, reaching for a sidearm he no longer carried. Vaughn pulled out a business card, held it between two fingers. My offer stands, 400,000 K, closing in 30 days. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. He set the card on the hood of Ethan's truck. Then he walked back to the Mercedes, climbed in, and drove away. The engine barely made a sound. Just smooth, expensive power gliding out of the parking lot and disappearing down Main Street. Ethan stood frozen, his heart hammering, adrenaline dumping into his system like it used to before a mission, before stepping into a building that might be wired to explode. Meredith approached slowly. That was Vaughn Sterling. I gathered. He's been buying up land around here for 10 years. Development projects, luxury homes, tourist resorts. Most people sell because the offer's good, and the alternative is fighting lawyers they can't afford. She picked up the business card, looked at it, handed it to Ethan. He doesn't take no for an answer. He's going to have to learn. Is he right? Did you find something? Ethan met her eyes, calculated the risk, weighed trust against safety. Yeah, I found something. What? The reason my grandfather stayed away. The reason men are still interested in his property 70 years after Fort Shadow closed. He unlocked the truck. Ranger jumped in, still alert, still scanning the parking lot for threats. And the reason I need to figure out what the hell to do about it before someone gets hurt. Meredith nodded slowly. If you need help researching, finding documents, understanding what you're up against, the library's open until 6 every weekday. Thanks. Be careful, Ethan. Men like Vaughn Sterling don't make threats they're not willing to follow through on. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd met men like that before, in different countries, different contexts, but the type was universal. People who believed the world was divided into those who had power and those who didn't, who saw everything as transactional, who couldn't conceive of someone saying no simply because it was the right thing to do. Ethan drove back to the cabin as the sun touched the western horizon. The forest turned gold in shadow. The road narrowed to dirt, the world shrinking down to trees and silence and the steady presence of the dog beside him. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He pulled over to read it. The message was simple. A photograph. His trailer taken from a distance. The angle suggesting someone standing in the woods maybe 50 yards away. The timestamp read 30 minutes ago. While he'd been in the library. No words, no explanation, just the image and the implication. We know where you live. We're watching. Ethan deleted the message, started driving again, his jaw tight enough to ache. When he reached the cabin, another truck was already there. Familiar blue paint, Montana plates. Gus Brennan stood on the porch leaning against the railing, looking like he'd been waiting a while. Got a call from Meredith Whitmore, Gus said as Ethan climbed out. Said Vaughn Sterling has cornered you at the library. News travels fast. In a town this size, faster than you think. Gus's face was grave. What did he say? Made an offer, $400,000 for the property. When I said no, he made it clear that was the wrong answer. Did he threaten you? Not directly. Talked about how accidents happen, how dogs get mistaken for wildlife. Ethan showed Gus the deleted message, the photograph of his trailer. The old man's hands tightened on the porch railing. That son of a bitch. He's escalating faster than I thought. Why now? Garrison's been dead 2 years. If Vaughn wanted the property, why wait until I inherited it? Because Garrison had legal protections in place, trusts, clauses that triggered if anyone tried to force a sale. Your grandfather might have cut himself off from family, but he made damn sure the land stayed protected. Gus sat heavily in the old rocker. But those protections transferred to you. And you're not a 98-year-old man with lawyers and decades of defensive preparation. You're a target Vaughn thinks he can intimidate. He's wrong. I know he is, but he doesn't, not yet. Gus looked out at the darkening forest. There's something else you need to know. The land you inherited. It's not just valuable because it's pretty. There's a water table underneath, the Pine Ridge Aquifer, one of the largest underground water sources in this part of Montana. Whoever controls this land controls the water rights for 50 miles around. Ethan felt pieces clicking into place. That's what he really wants. The machine is secondary, a bonus, but the water that's worth hundreds of millions if developed right. He could charge every farm, every ranch, every town in the region for access. Gus shook his head. Garrison knew. It's why he held on so tight. Why he made sure it stayed in the family. Why didn't he tell me? Same reason he didn't tell you about Fort Shadow. Same reason he stayed away. Telling you made you part of it. Made you someone who knew. Someone who could be pressured. Hurt. Used. Gus stood. But now you know anyway. So the question is what you do with that knowledge. Ethan looked at the forest, the trees, the land his grandfather had protected for 7 decades. I need to see it. The machine. Whispering Lake. Whatever's buried there? I figured you'd say that. Gus pulled a folded map from his jacket. This is how we hit it. The approach. The markers. The entrance. It's been 40 years since I was last there, but the geography doesn't change much. The map showed the route through the forest, trails marked with cairns and blazes, a natural depression that led to the lake. And beneath the lake marked with an X, the chamber where Project Silence waited in the dark. When do you want to go? Gus asked. Tomorrow, first light. I'll come with you. No, Ethan's voice was firm. You're 97 years old. This is going to be rough terrain. I need you here. Need someone who knows what we're dealing with in case something goes wrong. Gus wanted to argue. Ethan could see it in his face. But the old man was practical enough to recognize reality. Then you take someone else. Meredith, maybe. Or that sheriff. You don't go alone. I'll talk to Sheriff Thornton. See if he's willing to take a walk in the woods with a man who's chasing ghosts. You are not chasing ghosts. You're chasing a machine that killed people and a man who wants to use it. Gus gripped his shoulder. Be careful. Vaughn's not the kind to make empty threats. If he says accidents happen, he means he'll make them happen. After Gus left, Ethan stood on the porch and watched night settle over the forest. The sounds changing. Crickets, owls, the rustle of things moving through undergrowth. Ranger pressed against his leg, warm and solid and alert. Tomorrow we go looking for nightmares, Ethan said quietly. Think we're ready for that. The shepherd's tail moved in a short, deliberate arc. Steady, certain. The kind of certainty that came from training and experience and the bone-deep knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The way they always had. The way they always would. The morning came cold and clear. Frost clung to the grass outside the cabin, turning the world silver in the early light. Ethan had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the technical drawings, the casualty reports, the families who'd never gotten answers. He'd called Sheriff Wade Thornton the night before. The conversation had been brief. Wade had listened without interrupting, then said he'd meet Ethan at the cabin at dawn. A man who'd worn a badge for 30 years knew when to ask questions and when to just show up. Wade's patrol truck pulled up at 6:15. The sheriff climbed out, dressed in hiking boots and a canvas jacket instead of his uniform. Practical, ready for rough terrain. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with steel gray hair, and the kind of face that had seen enough trouble to recognize it coming from a distance. "Morning," Wade said, accepting the coffee Ethan handed him. "Gus called me last night, filled in some details. Said you need someone to watch your back while you go looking for something that shouldn't exist." "That about covers it." Wade sipped the coffee and looked at Ranger, who sat at attention near Ethan's truck. "That's a good dog. Service dog. PTSD, but he's got training beyond that. Alerts, grounding. Been with me since I got out. I had a K9 partner for 8 years. Best partner I ever had. Retired now, but still sharp." Woodley Wade set down his cup. "You sure you want to do this? Once you see what's down there, you can't unsee it. And knowing makes you responsible." "I'm already responsible." Garrison made sure of that. Wade nodded slowly. "Then let's go find out what your grandfather spent 70 years protecting." They took Ethan's truck as far as the old logging road would allow. The path had been abandoned for decades, reclaimed by saplings and undergrowth. After 2 miles, the trees grew too thick and the ground too rough. They parked and continued on foot. Gus's map was detailed. Every landmark noted. Blazes carved into tree bark, cairns of stacked stones, a dry creek bed that led north. Ethan followed the route with the precision he'd learned in the Marines. Count your steps, mark your back trail, never assume you'll remember the way out. Ranger moved ahead, nose working the air, not searching for anything specific, just alert, present. The way he'd been trained to be when the environment was unfamiliar and the stakes were unclear. They walked for an hour. The forest changed around them. Pines gave way to birch. The ground rose and fell in gentle swells. Wade moved quietly for a big man, placing his feet with care, breathing steady. He'd done this before, tracking suspects through rough country, following trails that didn't want to be found. "Vaughn Sterling," Wade said after a long silence. "What do you know about him?" "Rich, powerful, thinks the world's for sale." "He's more than that. His family's been in Montana since the 1890s. Railroad money, timber, mining. They've always had their hands in things that move the state forward." Wade stepped over a fallen log. "But there's rumors, land deals that went bad for the other party, families who sold cheap after accidents made them desperate. Nothing provable, nothing you could build a case on. But patterns." Gus said his grandfather worked on Project Silence. Marcus Sterling died in 1952, right after Fort Shadow closed. Official cause was a heart attack. Wade glanced at Ethan, but Marcus was 43 years old and healthy as a horse. Then one day he just dropped dead, and the family got a payout from the government that let them buy half the county. Hush money. That's the theory, but again, nothing provable. Just stories old men tell when they've had too much whiskey and not enough sense. Wade paused. Vaughn grew up hearing those stories. Grew up thinking his grandfather was cheated, that the government stole something that belonged to the Sterling family. Some people carry that kind of grievance their whole lives. The trees thinned ahead. Through the gaps, Ethan could see water, gray and still, reflecting the overcast sky like polished metal. Whispering Lake. It was smaller than he'd expected, maybe a quarter-mile across, surrounded by rocky shores and dense pine. The kind of place that looked peaceful until you knew what waited beneath the surface. Wade stopped at the shoreline. How deep? According to the map, the entrance is on the north side. There's a rock formation. Looks like a natural cave, but it's actually a shaft we dug and disguised. Ethan pulled out the map, oriented himself. This way. They followed the shore. Ranger stayed close now, his body language shifting. Ears forward, tail low. The dog sensed something. Maybe tension in Ethan's posture. Maybe some scent carried on the wind. Whatever it was, Ranger knew this wasn't a casual hike anymore. The rock formation rose from the water like a broken tooth, granite worn smooth by time and weather. Ethan circled it, looking for the markers Garrison had noted. 3 stones in a triangle, moss growing north. A crack in the rock, face wide enough to fit a man if he turned sideways. Here, Ethan said. Wade examined the crack. You're telling me there's a whole laboratory down there? Not a laboratory, a vault. 1 chamber, sealed and hidden. And you think it's still intact after 70 years. Only one way to find out. Ethan pulled a flashlight from his pack. Ranger pressed against his leg. The dog's breathing had changed. Faster, shallower. He was picking up on Ethan's stress, responding to it the way he'd been trained. Ethan knelt and stroked the shepherd's head. The ritual that meant calm down. We're okay. I've got this. Stay close, buddy. I need you with me. Ranger's breathing slowed. His eyes never left Ethan's face. Trust absolute, unwavering. Wade went first, squeezing through the crack with his flashlight leading the way. Ethan followed Ranger right behind. The passage was tight, rough stone scraping against shoulders. The smell of damp earth and minerals. Cold air rising from below. After 20 feet, the passage opened into a wider tunnel. Man-made. The walls showed chisel marks. Support beams overhead, old timber going soft with rot. This wasn't natural, this was engineering. Deliberate construction disguised to look like a collapsed mine. The tunnel descended at a steady angle. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, the sound echoing, strange and hollow. Ethan's flashlight beam caught movement. Bats maybe, or shadows playing tricks. Ranger stayed pressed against his leg now. The dog didn't like enclosed spaces, didn't like the dark, but he didn't hesitate, didn't pull back. Where Ethan went, Ranger followed. After 50 yards, the tunnel ended at a steel door, corroded but intact, a military insignia welded to the surface, an eagle clutching lightning bolts, the same symbol Ethan had seen in the documents. The door had no lock, just a wheel handle like something from a submarine. Wade gripped it with both hands and turned. The metal screamed in protest, rust flaking away. Then movement, slow, reluctant, but movement. The door swung open on hinges that shrieked like dying animals. Beyond was a chamber, maybe 30 feet across, 15 feet high. Reinforced concrete walls, electrical conduits running along the ceiling, long since dead, and in the center, covered with tarps gone stiff with age, the unmistakable shape of machinery. Ethan stepped inside. The air was different here. Stale, chemical. The smell of old oil and metal and something else. Something that made his skin crawl without understanding why. He pulled back one of the tarps. Dust exploded into the air, catching the flashlight beam like snow. Beneath was steel and copper, tubes and chambers, parabolic reflectors the size of satellite dishes, a control panel with gauges and dials and switches that looked like they belonged in a 1940s science fiction movie. Project Silence, the machine that had killed 3 men and ruined countless lives. Still here, still intact, waiting. Wade whistled low. Jesus Christ, it's real. Ethan moved around the machine, examining the construction. The workmanship was incredible. Precision engineering before computers, before CAD software. Everything measured and machined by hand. By men like Garrison who understood that tolerances mattered. That small errors multiplied into catastrophic failures. On the far side of the chamber, he found something else. A smaller box. Metal. The wax seal broken recently. Someone had been here, had opened this. Ethan pried off the lid. Inside were more documents. But these weren't from 1947, these were newer. Printed on modern paper, calculations, frequency modulations, notes in the margin in handwriting he didn't recognize. Wade looked over his shoulder. When were those written? Ethan checked the dates. Last year, month before Garrison died. Someone knew about this place, was coming here, researching. Wade's voice went hard. Vaughn Sterling. A sound cut through the silence. Footsteps. In the tunnel behind them. Multiple people. Moving with purpose. Not trying to be quiet. Wade's hand went to his sidearm. We've got company. 2 men emerged from the tunnel into the chamber. Both armed, both moving with tactical precision. The younger one, maybe 30, swept the room with his rifle. The older one, gray-haired and hard-faced, locked eyes with Wade. Sheriff, the older man said calmly, put the weapon down. Mr. Sterling just wants to talk. Wade's gun was already out, pointed. The standoff instant and absolute. That's funny, Wade replied. I was about to say the same thing. Ethan's hands went up slowly, non-threatening. His eyes never left the men. Reading them, assessing. The younger one was nervous. Finger too tight on the trigger. The older one was a professional. Someone who'd done this before. Ranger stood between Ethan and the gunman. Not aggressive. Not yet. Just positioned. Ready. Mr. Sterling wants to talk, the older man repeated. He's waiting outside. Suggested we bring you up, peacefully if possible. And if not, Ethan asked, then not peacefully. The sound that came from Ranger's throat was barely audible, a vibration more than a growl. But both men looked at the dog, recognized what they were seeing. 70 pounds of muscle and training and loyalty that wouldn't hesitate if his human was threatened. "Call off your dog," the younger one said. His voice had an edge now, fear creeping in. "He's fine where he is," Ethan replied. "I said call him off." And I said no. The younger man shifted his aim, pointed the rifle at Ranger. Everything happened at once. Wade fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the tunnel wall 6 inches from the younger man's head. Stone exploded. The man flinched, stumbled back. Ethan moved, closed the distance in 2 steps, grabbed the rifle barrel, twisted. The weapon came free. Ethan reversed it, slammed the stock into the man's solar plexus. He went down gasping. The older man swung his weapon toward Wade. Ranger launched, 80 miles of velocity and 70 pounds of mass, jaws clamping on the man's forearm. The gun clattered to the concrete. The man screamed, "Ranger, release!" The dog let go instantly, backed up 3 steps, stood ready, blood on his muzzle. The man clutched his arm, deep punctures, serious but not life-threatening. Wade had both weapons now. He kicked them toward the far wall. "On your knees, hands behind your head." The men complied. The younger one still couldn't breathe properly. The older one was trying to stop the bleeding with his good hand. Ethan knelt beside Ranger, checked him over. No injuries, just adrenaline and training. The dog's tail gave a brief wag. Job done, waiting for the next command. "Good boy," Ethan said quietly. His hands shook as he stroked the shepherd's head. "That's my good boy." Wade pulled zip ties from his belt, secured both men's hands. "You boys want to tell me what Sterling's paying you to commit assault with a deadly weapon?" Neither man spoke. "That's fine. You can save it for the statement downtown." Wade looked at Ethan. "We need to leave, now. If these two are down here, Sterling's got more up top." They moved fast. Back through the tunnel, Ranger in the lead now, alert, scanning. The 3 men following with Wade bringing up the rear, his service weapon ready. The passage seemed longer going up, steeper, the darkness pressing in. Ethan's breathing was too fast, his heart hammering. The enclosed space, the smell, the sound of boots on stone. It wasn't the tunnel anymore. It was a building in Helmand. Narrow stairs, dark, the smell of explosives. His team moving up. The sound of breathing in the dark. Then the flash, the noise. The Ranger's cold nose pressed into his palm. The dog had stopped, turned around, pressed against Ethan's leg with the full weight of his body. Deep pressure, grounding. Ethan's hand found fur, focused on the texture, the warmth, the solid reality of the animal beside him. He counted breaths. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, the way the therapist had taught him, the way Ranger knew to wait for. "You okay?" Wade asked quietly. "Yeah, just need a second." "Take your time." 30 seconds. That's all it took. 30 seconds of contact with the duh, of breathing, of being present instead of lost in memory. Then the world settled back into focus. The tunnel was just a tunnel. The darkness was just absence of light. "I'm good," Ethan said. "Let's move." They emerged into daylight that felt too bright after the darkness below. Ethan squinted. Ranger stepped out ahead, then stopped, went rigid. Von Sterling stood 20 yards away. 3 more men with him. No weapons visible, but Ethan didn't doubt they were armed. The Mercedes was parked on the old logging road. Somehow they'd found a way to drive where Ethan had walked. Money bought knowledge, bought access, bought people who knew the forest better than maps could show. "Sheriff Thornton," Vaughn said pleasantly, "and Mr. Harlow, what a coincidence finding you here." "No coincidence," Wade replied. "You sent your boys down to collect us. I sent them to invite you for a conversation. If they were overzealous, I apologize." One of them pointed a weapon at a law enforcement officer. "That's not overzealous, that's felony assault." Vaughn's expression didn't change. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. These things happen in tense situations." "The only tense situation is you trespassing on private property," Ethan said. "This land belongs to me." "Does it?" "I've reviewed the property records. There's some ambiguity about the boundaries, about water rights, about what exactly your grandfather owned versus what he held in trust." Vaughn took a step forward. "I'm prepared to resolve all that ambiguity. $400,000. Final offer. You sign today and all these complications disappear." "Not interested." "Mr. Harlow, you're a smart man, former military. You understand strategy. You understand when you're outmatched." "Yeah," Vaughn gestured to the forest around them. "I have resources you can't imagine. Legal teams, political connections, the kind of influence that makes problems go away, or makes them worse depending on what's needed. Sounds like a threat. It's an observation. I want what's buried here. I want it badly enough to pay well for it. But if you force me to take other approaches, I will. And you won't like how that ends, Ranger growled, low and continuous. A sound that made the hair on Ethan's neck stand up. One of Vaughn's men shifted, his hand moving toward his jacket. Wade's weapon came up. Don't! Everyone froze. The forest went quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of men breathing and a dog warning that violence was one wrong move away. Gentlemen, Vaughn said calmly, there's no need for this to escalate. Sheriff, you're pointing a weapon at a civilian. That seems excessive. Your man was reaching for a gun. That seems like a threat. He was reaching for his phone to call our attorney. Tell him to do it slowly with his left hand, 2 fingers. The man complied, pulled out a phone, held it up. Wade nodded. Vaughn smiled. See, misunderstandings, that's all this is. Everyone's nervous. Everyone's making assumptions. He looked at Ethan. I'm trying to do business, legal, above board. You're the one who keeps making this difficult. Because you don't want business. You want control. You want a weapon that killed people. And you want the water rights that come with this land. I want to develop resources that are currently wasted, to bring jobs and investment to a region that desperately needs both. If there's historical artifacts on the property, they belong in a museum, not buried in the dark. Historical artifacts, Ethan repeated. That's what you're calling it. What would you call it? A mistake. One that should stay buried. Vaughn's pleasant expression finally cracked. Something colder showed through. Your grandfather thought the same thing. Spent his whole life running from progress. From the future. Look where it got him. Alone, isolated, dying in a cabin with nothing but regrets. Ethan's hands clenched. You didn't know him. I knew him better than you did. I spent 5 years learning from him, watching him waste his brilliance on guilt and fear. He could have been great. Could have finished what Project Silence started. Instead, he buried it and wasted the rest of his life guarding a secret nobody cared about anymore. People died. People die in all kinds of research. That's the cost of advancement, of pushing boundaries. Your grandfather was too weak to accept that cost. Vaughn stepped closer. Wade's gun tracked him. But I'm not weak. I'm not afraid. And I'm not walking away from this. Then you're going to be disappointed. We'll see. Vaughn turned to his men. Let's go. Mr. Harlow needs time to consider his options, to understand how this ends if he continues to be unreasonable. They walked back to the Mercedes, climbed in. The engine started with a purr of expensive engineering. The car pulled away, navigating the rough logging road with the confidence of someone who'd been here before. Wade lowered his weapon. That was a direct threat. I noticed. I can arrest him, intimidation, trespassing, conspiracy, and his lawyers will have him out in an hour. Then he'll come back with more resources and a better plan. Ethan watched the Mercedes disappear through the trees. No, arresting him doesn't solve this. Then what does Ethan thought about the machine? The documents. The families who'd never gotten justice. 70 years of secrets kept in the dark. Light, he said finally. We bring it into the light. Make it public. Make it impossible to hide or control. How? I don't know yet. But I know someone who might. Ethan pulled out his phone, checked the time. Come on, we need to get back to town. They hiked back to the truck in silence. Ranger stayed close to Ethan's side. The dog's body language still alert, still protective. The encounter had triggered something in him. Recognition that his human was under threat, that the work wasn't done. When they reached the truck, Ethan found what he'd been half expecting. All 4 tires slashed. Deep cuts that would require complete replacement. Sterling's men had been thorough. Wade examined the damage. I'll call for a tow and backup. Get those 2 idiots out of the cave and into custody. They'll lawyer up. Won't say anything. Probably, but the arrest goes on record. Shows a pattern if Sterling keeps escalating. Wade made the calls. Dispatch said 45 minutes for the tow truck. Ethan sat on the tailgate. Ranger jumped up beside him. The dog leaned against his side. Warm, solid, real. We almost died down there, Ethan said quietly. Wade nodded. But we didn't. Because of him. Ethan scratched behind Ranger's ears. The shepherd's tail brushed the truck bed in a short, deliberate arc. He saved us. Again. That's what they do. The good ones. They don't think about it. Don't hesitate. They just act because that's their job. That's their purpose. Wade looked at the shepherd. You're lucky to have him. I know. The tow truck arrived 37 minutes later. They loaded Ethan's vehicle and rode back to town in Wade's patrol truck. Ranger sat in the back seat, head resting on the center console between the two men, close enough to maintain contact, close enough to know everyone was okay. Pine Ridge looked different in the afternoon light, smaller, more vulnerable. The kind of town that could be bought and sold by someone with enough money and enough determination. Wade dropped Ethan at the library. I need to process the arrests, file the reports. You going to be okay? Yeah, I need to talk to Meredith anyway, see if she can help with something. Be careful. Sterling's watching, looking for leverage. I know. Inside the library, Meredith was shelving books. She looked up when Ethan entered, saw his expression, set down the books immediately. What happened? We found it, the machine, and Sterling found us finding it. She led him to the back room, closed the door. Ethan told her everything. The chamber, the confrontation, the threats, Sterling's determination to take what he wanted, regardless of cost. When he finished, Meredith was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, you need to go public before he can control the narrative. That's what I was thinking. But how a press conference, the media will think I'm crazy unless I have proof. Not a press conference, live stream. She pulled out her phone. Social media, raw, unfiltered. You show people the documents, show them the chamber, tell them the story before Sterling can spin it. You think people will believe it? I think in this day and age, conspiracy theories get more traction than official statements. You're not trying to convince everyone, just enough people that Sterling can't make this disappear quietly. Ethan considered. The strategy made sense. Raw truth before polished lies. Evidence before spin. I'd need help. Someone to film. Someone who knows how to make it compelling. I can film. I've done enough community events to know the basics. And I know people at the regional paper, the state news stations. We get the stream going viral, they'll pick it up. Run with it. When, tonight, before Sterling knows you're planning it, before he can get injunctions or pressure platforms to take it down. Meredith's eyes were intense, determined. My grandfather spent his whole life afraid to speak about what he saw at Fort Shadow. I'm not making that mistake. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay, tonight. They spent the afternoon planning. Meredith made calls, reached out to journalists she knew, set up accounts, prepared the technical infrastructure. Ethan organized the documents, selected the most damning evidence, the casualty reports, the technical specifications, the proof that Project Silence had killed and been covered up. At 7, they were ready. Meredith had borrowed video equipment from the community center. Professional looking but accessible. They set up in the library's back room, documents spread on the table. Good lighting, clear audio. Ethan sat in front of the camera, Ranger beside him, the dog's presence calming, grounding. You ready? Meredith asked. As I'll ever be. She started the stream, watched the viewer count. 3 people, then 10, then 30. Social media algorithms picking up the activity, pushing it out. Ethan took a breath, looked at the camera, began to speak. My name is Ethan Cole Harlow. I'm a former Marine, EOD specialist, and I'm about to tell you about a weapon the government built in 1947. A weapon that killed people. A weapon that was buried and covered up. A weapon that powerful men are trying to find right now. He held up the first document, the Project Silence header visible. Classification stamps clear. This is real. This happened, and it's still happening. He walked through the evidence, page by page, name by name. The men who died, the families who were silenced, the technology that was too dangerous to exist, but too valuable to destroy. The viewer count climbed, 100, 500, 1,000. Meredith monitored the comments, people sharing, tagging journalists, demanding answers. Ethan showed photographs of the chamber, blurry but clear enough, the machine, the military insignia, the proof that this wasn't theory. This was real. A man named Vaughn Sterling wants this weapon. He's threatened me, threatened my dog, slashed my tires, sent armed men to intimidate me into selling land that contains this machine. Ethan leaned toward the camera. I'm not selling, and I'm not staying silent. This story needs to be told. The families deserve truth. The public deserves to know what their government built and buried. 2,000 viewers. 3,000. The stream was viral now, spreading beyond Montana, beyond the region, going national. Ethan talked for 20 minutes, answered questions from the comments, showed every piece of evidence, made it impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. When he finished, the viewer count was over 10,000. The recording would live forever, shared and reshared, archived and analyzed. Meredith ended the stream, looked at the analytics. It's everywhere. Local news is already calling. Regional stations. Someone from CNN just left a message. Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You just made a very serious mistake. No signature, but Ethan knew who sent it. He deleted the message, looked at Ranger. The dog's tail moved in a short, deliberate arc. Maybe, Ethan said to the empty thread, but it's done now. Outside, the library car door slammed. Voices, equipment being set up. The media had arrived, drawn by the viral stream, hungry for the story. Sheriff Wade appeared at the library door. You need to see this. He led Ethan outside. 3 news vans, reporters with cameras, a crowd gathering, people from town, drawn by the commotion and the rumors spreading faster than facts. One reporter approached, young, aggressive, microphone extended. Mr. Harlow, can you confirm the claims you made in your live stream? Everything I said is documented and verifiable. And Vaughn Sterling, do you stand by your accusations? They're not accusations, they're facts. More questions, more cameras. The story taking on a life of its own. Becoming real in a way that documents alone could never be. Wade pulled Ethan aside. Sterling's lawyers are already moving. Cease and desist. Defamation threats. They're trying to bury this legally. Too late. It's out there now. Yeah, but he's not going to let this go. Men like him don't lose gracefully. That night, Ethan stayed at Wade's house. The sheriff had insisted. Said the cabin was too isolated. Too vulnerable. That Sterling would be desperate now. Unpredictable. Ranger slept at the foot of the guest bed, alert even in rest. Ready. Ethan lay awake watching shadows move across the ceiling, thinking about Garrison, about the sacrifice of a lifetime lived in isolation to protect a secret, about whether exposure was the right choice or just the only one left. His phone buzzed. A call from Gus. You did it, the old man said. Put it all out there. Had to. Garrison would have been proud, or terrified, maybe both. A pause. Sterling called me, demanded I tell him the exact location of the chamber. Said he'd pay whatever I wanted. What did you say? I told him to go to hell, then I hung up. Gus chuckled. Felt good. Should have done it 70 years ago. Be careful, he's desperate. So am I. Desperate to see this finished right. You need anything you call. After Gus hung up, Ethan checked the news. The story was everywhere. Major networks, international press, historians weighing in, physicists explaining the theory behind acoustic weapons, ethicists debating government secrecy. The narrative was out of Sterling's control, out of anyone's control. Truth had a momentum of its own. Morning came with rain, heavy drops drumming against the windows. Wade made coffee and turned on the television. The morning news led with the story, experts analyzing the documents, government officials denying, admitting, deflecting. They're calling for a congressional investigation, Wade said, demanding the remaining Fort Shadow files be declassified. Will they be? Eventually. These things take time, but the pressure's there now, public attention. That changes things. Ethan's phone rang. Sarah Mitchell, the lawyer. You need to come to my office, she said without preamble. Now, we have a situation. They drove through the rain. The town looked gray and tired, water running in the gutters. The news vans still camped outside the library, waiting for the next development. Sarah's office was warm and dry. She had documents spread across her desk. Her expression was grave. Vaughn Sterling filed a lawsuit this morning. He's claiming ownership of the land based on a deed from 1952 that allegedly supersedes your grandfather's title. That's impossible. It would be except the deed appears legitimate, filed with the county, notarized, signed by Garrison Harlow. She pushed a photocopy across the desk. Is that your grandfather's signature? Ethan studied it, the loops, the angle. It looked right, but something was off. The pressure, the way certain letters connected. It's close, but I don't think it's real. Close enough that a court might accept it. Sterling's arguing that Garrison sold the land decades ago, that he had no right to leave it to you, that any transfer of ownership is invalid. It's a forgery. Then we need to prove it, fast. Sterling's lawyers are good. They'll drag this out, tie up the property in litigation for years. Sarah leaned back. But there's another angle. The water rights. Those are documented separately. In the trust papers from the bank. Sterling can challenge ownership of the surface land, but the subsurface rights are clearly yours. Meaning what? meaning even if he wins the land, he doesn't get the water, and the water is what he really wants. She smiled grimly. So we fight him on both fronts. Challenge the deed, protect the water rights, make it too expensive and too public for him to continue. Ethan nodded. Do it. The legal battle began that afternoon. Motions filed, counter motions, experts hired to analyze signatures and documents. The press covering every development. Sterling responded by going on television. Polished, sympathetic, claiming he was simply trying to preserve Montana's history, that the weapon should be in a museum, that he was the victim of a smear campaign by a troubled veteran. The narrative war was joined, but Ethan had something Sterling didn't. He had the truth, raw and documented and impossible to completely bury. 3 days later, the FBI opened an investigation, not into Sterling, into Fort Shadow, into what had been done there and what had been covered up. Federal agents interviewed Gus, examined the chamber, seized the machine as evidence. Project Silence was finally in the light. Sterling's lawsuit stalled. His lawyers found themselves defending against questions they couldn't answer, documents they couldn't explain. The forged deed fell apart under expert analysis. Modern printing techniques masked to look aged, a forgery so obvious it was insulting once examined properly. The investigation widened. Forensic accountants traced Sterling's finances, found payments to document forgers, offshore accounts, money moved to silence witnesses who'd never actually been silenced because they'd never existed in the first place. The media covered every revelation, each new detail another nail in Sterling's carefully constructed empire. His board of directors began distancing themselves. Partners filed lawsuits. Investors demanded explanations he couldn't provide. The water rights lawsuit collapsed when 3 expert witnesses confirmed Garrison's trust documents were authentic and legally binding. Sterling's own deed, by contrast, showed signs of fabrication that became more obvious with each examination. His lawyers advised settlement, his PR team advised silence, his accountants advised bankruptcy protection. 2 weeks after the live stream, Sterling withdrew his claim, released a statement saying he was stepping back from public life to focus on family. Translation: his reputation was destroyed, his business damaged, his grand plan in ruins. Wade called Ethan with the news. It's over. The land's yours, clean and clear. What about Sterling? He's done. His company's stock tanked. Partners are pulling out. The FBI is still investigating whether he was involved in the forgery. Wade paused. You won. Cleanly. Completely. Ethan should have felt relief. Victory. Instead, he just felt tired. He drove back to the cabin, Ranger beside him, the dog calm now. The immediate threat passed. The forest looked the same as always. Pine and shadow. The cabin waited, still standing, still holding its secrets. Ethan walked inside. The space felt different now. Less haunted. Less heavy with the weight of things unsaid. He stood at the window, looking out at the land his grandfather had protected for 70 years. The land that was his now. His to protect. His to decide what to do with. His phone buzzed. An email from a veterans organization. They'd heard about his story, about the PTSD, about Ranger. They wanted to talk about a project, a therapy center, using the land, helping other veterans. Ethan read the proposal, felt something shift in his chest. Purpose, direction, the kind of thing Garrison might have wanted if he'd known how. 3 months later, ground broke on the Harlow Veterans Wellness Center, a partnership between the veterans organization, the county, and Ethan's private funding from selling water rights to the regional authority at a fair price. The center would offer therapy, service dog training, outdoor programs, a place for people who'd seen too much and carried too much to find some measure of peace. Gus attended the groundbreaking, 97 years old and still standing straight. He shook Ethan's hand. Garrison would have been proud. You think, I know. This is what he wanted, not the isolation, not the fear, but the helping, the healing, the using of what we have to make things better. Gus looked at the forest. He spent his whole life protecting this place. Now you're giving it purpose. Meredith was there. She'd been hired as the center's historian, documenting the stories, making sure the truth stayed told. Sheriff Wade brought his old K9 partner. Retired now, but still sharp, still capable of teaching new dogs the old skills. The center opened 6 months later. The first residents arrived, veterans from different wars, different eras, but carrying the same weight. Ranger became the chief therapy dog, patient, professional, knowing somehow that his job had expanded, that he was needed by more than just Ethan now. On the 1-year anniversary of Garrison's death, Ethan stood at the grave. A simple stone in the Pine Ridge Cemetery. The inscription read, Garrison Harlow, 1926 to 2024. He kept faith. Ethan placed a hand on the stone. I understand now. Why you stayed away. Why you carried it alone. You were protecting all of us from something we couldn't see. He paused. But I'm not carrying it alone. I'm sharing it. Turning it into something good. Hope that's okay. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the smell of rain and earth and growing things. Ranger sat beside him, head tilted, listening to something humans couldn't hear. Ethan looked out at the valley, at the town, at the center, visible in the distance. Lights on, people inside, healing happening one day at a time. We did it, he said quietly, to Garrison, to himself, to the D who'd saved his life in more ways than he could count. We brought the silence into the light, and we turned it into something worth keeping. The shepherd's tail brushed the ground once in approval, ready for whatever came next, the way he'd always been, the way he'd always be.